Welcome to The Explainer. We tend to think of education as this basic fundamental right? Like a key that unlocks opportunity for everyone. But what if for an entire group of people, that key was systematically denied, hidden away, or even made illegal to possess? Well, that's exactly the story for Black Americans. And today, we're going to dive into that long, difficult fight.
So what were those barriers? What really stood in the way? If you want to get a handle on the inequalities we still see in our schools today, you've got to go back. You have to look at the roadblocks that were intentionally put up, century after century. And what's really wild is how these barriers have changed and adapted over time.
Okay, first things first. We have to get this straight. This wasn't just one fight or some isolated event. Nope. This struggle for education has been a constant, non-stop battle. It's truly woven into the very fabric of Black history in America.
Think about it. Right from the very beginning of the country, every single generation had to push back against these huge, systemic walls, all just for the chance to learn. So, let's start at the beginning, with the most extreme barrier of all.
So our story really kicks off with a barrier that's almost hard to imagine today. A time when education wasn't just frowned upon, it was literally against the law. Yeah, just let that sink in for a second. The very first barrier wasn't about not having enough money for schools or a lack of teachers. No, it was the law itself. Why? Because literacy was seen as a massive threat to the entire system of slavery. So they made it a crime to teach an enslaved person to read or write, an actual crime.
Okay, so after the Civil War, that outright ban on education disappeared. But the barriers? Oh, they didn't go away. Not at all. They just morphed. They changed their shape. A brand new system popped up, one that used the law in a new and frankly insidious way to deny education.
And this brings us to a really key term, de jure segregation. Now, this is super important to understand. De jure means by law. So this wasn't just about people's personal prejudices or social customs. This was separation that was written into the law books, officially enforced by the government. And here it is, the three little words that gave this whole system a legal green light. In 1896, the Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson basically gave its official stamp of approval to racial segregation. And in doing so, it created this infamous idea of separate but equal.
So let's talk about how equal things really were. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Just look at this number. We're in Mississippi, 1907. For every Black student, the state spent $1.39, $1.39. Now, for every white student, they spent $5.02. That's not a gap, people. That is a massive chasm.
And this picture, this says it all, doesn't it? This is what that funding gap looked like in real life. These run-down, overcrowded, under-resourced schools. This wasn't a rare thing. This was the system. This was the harsh reality of separate but equal for millions and millions of kids.
And it wasn't just the money. The inequality was just crushing in so many ways. Can you imagine? Your classroom is a crowded shack. You're maybe sharing one or two beat-up books with the entire class. There's hardly any equipment, and get this, no school bus. So kids were walking, sometimes over 12 miles each way, just to get to a school that was designed to give them less.
But here's the thing. People did not just sit back and accept this. No way. Civil rights activists, brilliant lawyers, they started a long, coordinated legal fight. The plan was to dismantle this whole system of segregation, brick by brick, right in the courtroom. And this timeline really puts into perspective just how long and grueling this battle was. Look at this. From Plessy making segregation the law of the land in 1896, it took almost 60 years to get to Brown v. Board in 1954, which finally declared it unconstitutional. And even that wasn't the end. It took another whole decade for the Civil Rights Act to pass, giving the federal government the teeth it needed to actually enforce the decision. And these are the powerful words that finally broke the back of legal segregation. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. That one word, inherently, was a bombshell. The Supreme Court was saying it doesn't matter how you slice it. The very act of separating kids in school is unequal and unconstitutional. Period. This was a massive, monumental victory. But remember what we said about those barriers being shapeshifters? Well, it happened again. The fight against segregation by law was won, but it just gave way to a new fight against segregation in practice.
And this is the next crucial shift we have to understand. We went from de jure segregation, remember, by law, to something called de facto segregation, which basically means segregation by fact or in reality. This new kind wasn't in the law books. It was driven by other things, like where people lived, which made it so much harder to challenge in a courtroom.
So what did these new barriers look like? Well, they were a lot more subtle. You had things like redrawing school district lines to keep schools segregated. And even in schools that were technically integrated, you'd see stuff like academic tracking, which just so happened to put most black students in lower-level classes. You even had unequal treatment from teachers, all happening in the same building. It's like segregation moved from the front steps of the school right into the classroom itself.
And people knew this was happening. It wasn't some big secret. As early as 1968, a big government report called the Kerner Commission put out this incredibly stark warning. And listen to the words they used, because they're hauntingly familiar. Separate and unequal. They could see that even with all the legal wins, the country was just resegregating itself, this time because of social and economic pressures.
And that brings us all the way to today, because this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. The legacy of these constantly evolving barriers, from education being a crime, to being separate by law, to being separate in practice, it's still with us. You can see it in our schools right now. It affects funding, resources, you name it. And it leaves us with a really big, important question. After all this, how do we finally get to a place of real, true educational equity?